80% of schools in Colorado are closed because teachers are at the state capitol protesting newly proposed cuts to public education. The Denver Teachers Union says they're worried the new proposal could cause layoffs and balloon class sizes, hurting students in the process.
We are seeing and hearing a lot. Thousands of teachers expected here on the steps of the Colorado State Capitol, and you're getting a glimpse of just a few of them right now. They are still showing up as we speak because they're protesting specifically two things: how schools are funded in the state of Colorado, and millions that were promised last year that are now in limbo because the state of Colorado is facing a $1.2 billion budget shortfall. And as we kind of walk around this crowd here, you are going to see educators from all over the entire state here, Chris, that have come up to make sure that their voices are heard.
The dismantling of the Department of Education. Let me go ahead and break it down.
Come on, talk about it.
You got a whole bunch of people who think that these kids who don't get food at home will no longer get food at school because there is no DOE. First of all, it's the Department of Agriculture that handles the school meals. So there's still no child that's going to be left hungry. The next thing that I heard was that, oh my God, they're going to get rid of the Pell Grant and all of these other things so that HBCUs are going to suffer and kids who can't afford school aren't going to be able to go to school. Those instances, that subset of issues is going to be moved over to the Department of Treasury, and they're going to handle your new Pell Grants and your student aid and things like that. And then they'll say things like, oh my God, well, they're not going to fund disabilities or the IEP programs. That's being moved over to the Department of Health and Human Services. So if more black people knew that, we wouldn't have this uproar about the DOE going. And then let me also tell y'all that the DOE only pays for...
Thank you for touching on that.
Yeah, the DOE only pays for 10% of K through 12 schools. Like, it's only 10% of the funding. If you genuinely believe that your state cannot recover 10% of funds to give to the DOE, to give to the school system, which they already barely give money to, sweetheart, you are sadly mistaken. And at that point, that's when you have to look at your elected officials and see what are they voting on in these budgets. What are they asking for every fiscal year? Because now with Doge, we're seeing that we're paying millions of dollars to watch shrimp run on treadmills.
So I've been teaching classes in Pennsylvania, and I haven't really got to follow up on this yet. But I did see that President Trump dismantled the Department of Education, and I think it's a great idea, and here's why. You've got bureaucrats sitting up in Washington, D.C., deciding who the funding goes to, doing research that's clearly not helping the local schools because every school is different. Their cultures, their communities, their incomes are different. The superintendents, the principals, the teachers, they know the environment, they know the community. But you also have all these students that the Democrats allowed to come across the border that can't even speak English, and they've sticking them in schools in Texas, in Arizona, and other border states, and in New York. And the kids can't speak English, and that's our primary language. And because the teachers have had to deal with these students that can't speak English, it has taken away their time and ability and energy to be able to help American students, and has affected their education. And then you get big cities like Philadelphia and New York, other big cities, San Francisco, that are getting all this federal funding for education because of all the illegal kids that are in the schools. And so the rural kids, who there's not as many illegal children, if any at all, or the small towns in the country, they don't get as much funding because it doesn't meet the narrative of the Democrats that there are not enough illegal kids in the schools. Okay, so it's not fair, and it needed to be dismantled. And now the Treasury Department can take over the student loans, the federal grants, things like that. It's going to save $2 trillion dismantling the Department of Education. And we can make sure that everybody gets fair funding, that it's not just funds going to schools that fit the agenda of the Democrats. And if you don't think it's an issue that there's been illegal children in school with American students, a Texas teacher wrote me and she said, we have third graders reading on 35% of third graders are reading on grade level only because we have had our state and federal government so focused on testing that they've pressured us on this whole reading comprehension thing, and we're not teaching kids how to write and how to spell, and it should all go with the comprehension part. She said children are writing as if they're sending a text. They're not letting teachers teach anymore, and teachers aren't wanting to because they're being told what to do, and it's not working. They're putting so much pressure on them over these standardized tests that they're taking away the teacher's ability to teach. and we really need to give the ball back to the teachers.
What happens to our student loans if the Department of Education ceases to exist? If you're like me, your eyes lit up a little bit when you heard the Department of Education might be cut with this executive order. However, Donald Trump has said even if the Department of Education ceases to exist, which he has ordered, we're still going to have to pay our student loans. That's not a big deal. Took out the loans so I could have my dream job, got my education. I also wouldn't be opposed to not having to ever pay a student loan payment again. That payment collection responsibility will shift to another government entity. What's also likely to happen with that shift? Well, if you know anything about government work, it's pretty inefficient. And if we are cutting the workforce and then we're saying we're going to give this responsibility to a whole nother government agency, I imagine there's going to be some hiccups. And on top of that, there's probably going to be some lawsuits. Trump administration removed your ability to apply for certain payment plans online. One of those being the income-based payment plan or income-based repayment plan. Why is that important? Because you need to be on one of these payment plans to take part in something like public service loan forgiveness. In addition, the Trump administration removed the ability to apply for loan consolidation. Why is loan consolidation important? Because it is the first step in getting on an income-based repayment plan so that your loans can be forgiven through the public service loan forgiveness program. I guess this content is just a long-winded way of saying no one knows what to expect. Keep an eye on what your servicer says because the rules stay the same no matter who's in charge, no matter which government agency is responsible for the collection. You made a promise whenever you signed that note and you borrowed that money and nothing changes that. You're very unlikely to get out of paying those loans. However, it could get very complicated for the government to collect on those loans if the proper infrastructure is not in place. Mike Hansen, Texas dad lawyer, still paying on those loans to become a lawyer.
It's really hard for me to understand how some of the parents in the United States of America are going to have to explain to their children that the reason that they don't have special supports and individualized education plan anymore at school is because you voted for them not to.
Tricking so many Americans into believing that getting rid of the Department of Education is a good thing has got to be one of the most heinous crimes against Americans. The marginal dollars that you think you're gonna save, which, by the way, you're not. What a joke. They fucking played you so hard. Education, access to education, access to resources that enable education is one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves. To strip that away from people, it's disgusting. I'm smiling, but it's not funny, and I actually genuinely feel bad for those people. This is not one of those, like, dancing on your grave kind of things. No, I feel so bad for you.
I tried to watch Donald Trump's speech on getting rid of the Department of Education. I really did. I tried to watch it, but the more he talks, the more I am absolutely convinced he has no idea what the Department of Education actually does. He has no clue. And he's saying, oh, we just need to take education and take it back to the states. To the states. Let the states just be responsible, like they're not already, but like the states can just handle everything and you don't need any federal guidance whatsoever or federal assistance. He clearly has never been to, I don't know, red states like Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, West Virginia. Should I go on? Just let the states handle it, he says. Yeah, states have been handling it, red states, for a very long time. And guess what? They've been handling it very, very badly. Because if he just checked, most of the worst states in education are red states. But yeah, he doesn't really care about the education department, does he? He really doesn't care about education at all. Because if he did, he would have gotten the advice from experts. And let's face fact, the person that he put in charge of the Department of Education knows nothing about it whatsoever. So, yeah, that's what Donald Trump did today.
Well, there it is. Trump just signed an executive order to dismantle the Department of Education. We all knew this was coming, but lots of people were like, oh, he would never do that. Yes, he would, because it's in the Project 2025 handbook. So now all sorts of essential programs are at risk. Funding for low-income schools, many of which, for the record, are in districts that support Trump. Funding for special education programs is on the line. So yeah, that means if your kid needs an IEP, too fucking bad. Your kid needs specialized attention, oh well. Your kid has behavioral issues due to mental health diagnoses, too fucking bad. The only time Republicans care about mental health issues is after a school shooting, when they can blame the school shooting on mental health and not on guns. Also at risk, school lunch programs, because God forbid we feed children. Republicans love to talk about how they care about the kids. They're pro-family, they're pro-child, but how dare we give kids food? And of course, student debt relief programs are on the line. And this is just the beginning. Without a federal Department of Education, state education departments can do crazy shit. There are school districts that are currently trying to force teachers to teach that the 2020 election was stolen. Straight up propaganda. Lies. You agree? I know. You agree. So to anyone who said we were being alarmist and are still being alarmist, go to hell.
So I'm sitting here working, right? It's my normal Thursday. Got my blinds open, getting some sunlight. And of course, it has to be ruined. So let me catch you up on the latest wild thing. So Trump is actually trying to close the Department of Education. This is a straight up reckless decision, and it's just gonna harm a massive amount of students and borrowers and their families. And I'm sitting here, maybe we don't even care about having an educated country anymore. It's legally not even allowed to get rid of the department. It has to be done through an act of Congress. So despite that, he's still sabotaged it through several actions over the past couple weeks, but we're really apparently getting the full dismantle order today. Last week, for example, they fired almost 4,000 workers. What does the Department of Education really do? And let me sit here and run through a couple things that, just a sample of what the department does. It runs the Pell Grant program, basically educational grants that go to low-income students that they don't have to pay back. So it expands access. Those grants expand access to higher education. It handles and manages the $1.5 trillion federal student loan portfolio. So that's the amount of money that borrowers hold currently with student debt. And so that means, it manages the plans that students can access. It provides resources for borrowers. And by the way, you want to hold a protest on campus? Yeah, it also protects your civil rights, like freedom of speech. It orders targeted funding to historically black colleges and universities or minority-serving universities that expand higher education access for low-income students or students from those backgrounds. It protects us from the bad actors in the education space, like for-profit institutions that are commonly committing fraud to students. Yeah, I'm calling you out, DeVry University. Provides funding for services on college campuses for students who need to help students make it to graduation, like child care centers on campuses that help students with children. There's so much more. I just can't understand how none of what I just listed is viewed as valuable for the Trump administration. There's no reality where they cut almost 4,000 workers from this department and dismantle it in a way that doesn't affect or hurt borrowers, students, or families across the country. It's so ironic because Linda McMahon, the Secretary of Education, who is also, don't let us forget, that WWE wrestling spokesperson, is working herself out of a job. Does she care? No. So we have to stop this. Stay tuned for opportunities, but we have to take action and try to stop this.
So the Trump cult is very excited today about Donald Trump issuing an illegal and unconstitutional executive order to close the Department of Education. What they don't understand, because they don't really understand very much, is that the Trump cult, these people who live in red states, are going to be hurt the most if the Department of Education is closed. Because red states don't have any money. Red states take more money from the federal government than they give in taxes. Blue states are subsidizing the red states. Blue states have much better education systems than the red states. blue states have much better education outcomes than the red states. So if the federal government gets out of education and the states are just left to fend for themselves, the blue states are going to be just fine. It's the MAGA states, the red states, the ones who are celebrating this, who are going to really be screwed.
What's going to happen to student loans when Donald Trump signs the executive order to dismantle the Department of Education? Reportedly, they have been struggling to find somebody else to take up those loans, and nobody else want to touch it. Do that mean like people don't have to pay back their student loans? It's like when you have something go to collections. The company you originally owed that money to sold that debt to another company. I don't have to pay that shit. You already sold it. That's no longer my responsibility. You wasn't even supposed to. I don't owe anything to you. So like, if I owe money to AT&T and then AT&T shuts down, who do I owe that money to now? Matter of fact, I'll tell you what you do. Get Elon to go in there and start pressing buttons, just deleting shit. Now let's just see what happened. Just the only button he can press is delete. Okay, so just let him go in there for the Department of Education and just delete. Just let him go in that bitch and just tap delete until his little heart gets full.
So Donald Trump just signed an executive order to shut down and dismantle the Department of Education, which is illegal and against the law considering the Education Department was established by Congress, and therefore Donald Trump does not have the legal or constitutional authority to shut the agency down. However, if Congress decides to submit legislation to place a vote on whether or not to shut the agency down, then technically we could see the end of the Department of Education. And if that happens, the consequences and fallout would be devastating. Number one, the Education Department funds public schools. So without it, states would be required to fill in the funding gap, which a lot of states cannot afford to do, especially the red states that are subsidized by the big blue states. This would result in massive teacher layoffs, a deterioration of quality of education, and a loss of funding for most public schools in America. Number two, the Education Department sets the curriculum for public schools. So without it, MAGA governors and MAGA politicians would be setting the curriculum for subjects like history and science, which is terrifying. And number three, the Education Department oversees and distributes payments for student loans. So that is just skimming the surface of all of the bad things that could happen if the Education Department gets shut down. Yet that is exactly what Donald Trump just signed an executive order to accomplish. And as I said at the beginning of this video, an unlawful executive order. He does not have the authority to do this. Please somebody hold him accountable when he breaks the law, which seems to happen every single day.